probably figured out what the topic is.
Yes.
More gas. I ran across this article in Science of Mind. It's an interview with Dr. Amit Goswami, who is a quantum physicist. He's a retired professor of physics at University of Oregon. Written a number of books and was featured in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know? In an engaging, interesting fellow. And his latest book is God Is Not Dead. And he is, first of all, a trained PhD in quantum physics. He's the author of the textbook that is used in most universities around the world in quantum mechanics. So he's not some fly-by-night guy. He's a serious scientist. And he has developed, I don't want to call it a theory, I want to call it an analysis of quantum physics that says quantum physics proves the existence of God. And he says God isn't a being. God is not. We don't use that term to take into account the God of popular religion, the God that many of us grew up rejecting. That is an incomplete descriptor. The God that he speaks of is consciousness. Consciousness is everything. Consciousness is the ground of being, the ground of all being. And he goes through a step-by-step description of quantum physics and says that quantum physics is really the cutting edge of science today, and the only thing that can explain it without paradox is the existence of consciousness. And consciousness that includes everything is the name that we usually give to God. So you don't have to call it God. You don't, if you're a scientific materialist and you are offended by the discussion about the existence of God, you don't have to use that term. You can just say consciousness. And clearly, anyone who has studied quantum physics knows that consciousness literally determines the result of what exists. Everything exists in quantum physics as a realm of possibilities. And until the moment of observation, nothing exists. It's still in the realm of possibility. There are waves, and as soon as you look at a wave, it changes into a particle. And if you're not confused by that, you haven't paid attention. Because quantum physics is weird. It's literally weird. And what he suggests is that the existence of ultimate consciousness is the only thing that explains quantum physics without paradox, without things that can't be, as Craig read this morning. The existence of God is proven by the first law of thermodynamics. Because where did it all come from if it didn't come from something? Well, it came from the infinite realm of possibilities. And it was a decision at one point to allow an observation. And that observation coalesced all of the possibilities into what became the Big Bang. And the only way to see the possibility is with the definition of God as consciousness. So I was immediately struck by this because you may or may not know that I spent the better part of 30 years as a card-carrying atheist. I totally rejected the God that I was taught about as a child. I knew that that kind of being simply was made up. It couldn't possibly be. I just knew it. You know, there was just no way that a God of infinite love and creativity would condemn one or another of children, offspring, to eternal damnation. I just knew that that couldn't possibly be. I knew I wouldn't do that to any of my children, and I therefore concluded that if that was the way God was, then who needed that? And I just threw the baby out with the bathwater. And I wandered around the planet for 30 years, quite content to be an atheist, to know that that was all just hogwash, that I was being conned by people who were trying to control what I did and what I thought and what I said and the way I behaved. So they tried to fear me into doing the way they think I should do. And I just said, don't need that. And then one fine day I had a mystical experience that was so far outside the realm of things that I considered to be rational and possible that I said, oops, I perhaps had thrown the baby out with the bathwater. So I began a search that included years of study and reading books and understanding and going to workshops and seminars and being in the presence of channeled energy and all kinds of things. And it led me to what I'm doing today. And because of my history as an atheist, a rejecter of the traditional notion of God, when some guy who's a brilliant scientist says, God exists and here's the proof, it has my immediate attention. Immediate. I ran out and bought the book. I wanted to read about it because it's very critical. And it's critical not just because it answers the question, does God exist? It provides an understanding of the way the whole world works, which is very important. You see, in quantum physics, there's a concept known as non-local communication, that signals transmit across great distances without time elapsing. There is a communication device that exists in non-local ways, outside of time and space, which is what we've talked about. The mind exists outside of time and space. And one of the great teachers, Dr. Ernest Holmes, founder of Science of Mind, said this 75 years ago. The universal mind contains all knowledge. It is the potential ultimate of all things. To it, all things are possible. And Dr. Goswami goes even further. He says, consciousness is the ground of all being. Matter first exists as possibility within consciousness. Quantum physics is the physics of possibilities. So understand that the world of scientific materialism, which is what most scientists today are acquainted with, rejects totally the concept of God as causation. They project upward causation. They say that the only thing that exists is matter, and that matter causes everything else to arise from it. That feelings and emotions are caused by chemicals that are secreted by the brain. And so causation arises from the existence, from the bottom, from the existence of matter. And they say, scientific materialists say, the only thing that matters is matter, and everything else is hope. And the only way to explain quantum physics is to say, well, there's a paradox there. That's a question we can't answer. We don't know how that works. But that's not sufficient. There ought to be a unified description of the way things work. And the really important impact of this concept of quantum physics and the existence of God is that it gives us the opportunity to learn to participate in the quantum field, in the quantum mind. We have the opportunity to tune in to the non-local mind and to adapt and to allow that energy to influence us. And it creates in us neural pathways that allow us to operate differently. It's training. It's a process. And we have to do it if we are to change the world. Einstein, a rather bright gentleman of the last century, said that problems can never be solved at the level they are created. And that's exactly the problem the world faces today. We have scientific materialism, we have capitalism, we have democracy, and they've run amok. They have gotten all mixed up, and they've lost any ethical basis. There's no such thing as ethics in capitalism. And it's gone crazy because we've lost touch with the non-local divine presence. And what we can do about that is to touch into that presence, to train ourselves to access the non-local mind. We can do this because it is part of oneness. Oneness is all there is. All there really is consciousness. And we have the opportunity to tap into that consciousness and to allow universal consciousness to enable us to make a quantum leap. And we must make a quantum leap. We must discover a new way of being, a new way of operating that is beyond the limits that we've bumped against today in the world. Capitalism isn't working so well in taking care of all of the people's needs. The income disparity is growing by leaps and bounds. We have people who are wealthy beyond imagination, and we have people who are starving to death. Consequently, we have to find a new way to solve that problem. We can't think it into existence. We have to adopt non-local thinking. We have to participate with the ultimate mind, the ultimate of possibilities, and that is God. That is what we're up to. That's what we're after. We can solve the problems of the world by adapting to quantum consciousness. We can do it, but we have to work at it. We have to participate in that non-local mind. And we can do it just by meditating, by prayer, which is an effort to change our minds, not to change the mind of the infinite. We can do it as a practice. We can do it and then tomorrow be back in our ego thought system. We can do that because no one is going to magically transform 100% overnight and become an enlightened being tomorrow. I say no one, and that's too broad. Some of you might do that, but generally that doesn't happen. Generally it's a process. And actually, we can become quantum activists. We can participate in the non-local mind, the realm of possibilities that exists way beyond what we think about. We will not solve the problems by thinking about it. We will solve the problems by making a quantum leap, by changing the whole process. And it is a process that requires a new spirituality, a new definition. One of the hazards of scientific materialism is that it drives a certain segment of the population back into rampant fundamentalism. They're so disturbed by what they see going on, they retreat back into a shell of fundamentalism. And that is a problem in and of itself. So what this suggestion is that we adopt a plan to tune in to infinite consciousness, which is simply another name for God, and to allow that energy to be what actually moves us, what leads us, what gives us the impetus, the aha moment. The quantum leap will occur because we have allowed the possibility. We have opened our mind to the infinite possibilities. Everything is possible. Nothing is impossible. And we have to simply discover it. We simply have to discover it. One of the important things that Einstein worked on in coming up with his theory of relativity occurred to him as he woke up one morning after having worked on this problem for 10 years. And it was just a flash of insight. It was, oh yes, time is not linear. And that was out of nowhere. No one had thought of time as anything other than rigid. Dot, 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 dot. And out of a flash of insight, Einstein woke up one morning and said, you know what? Time is variable. It can speed up and it can slow down. If you put a clock on a rocket ship and you send it blasting off into space, the time will actually slow down. And this was such a radical notion that it led him to conclude and be able to mathematically demonstrate the truth of E equals mc squared. And it was simply because he had this flash of insight in a moment that allowed him to say, time isn't what we thought. Time is not rigid. Time is compressible and expandable. And that's the kind of thing that will lead us to solve the problems of the world. We will not solve the problems of the world by taking up placards and marching against one thing or another. We will not solve the problems of the world by picking up a cudgel and whopping people beside the ear, hoping to adjust their personalities in some way or another. This will not work. What will solve the problems of the world is a quantum leap. We must participate in the infinite possibilities that exist in the world, because That is how the world came into existence. So, I hope I've tantalized your scientific energies and increased your wisdom and increased your desire to participate in the quantum field. And now it's open mic time.